You all know I'm a stickler for time. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning at our breakfast club on leadership and technology. For anybody new here, the breakfast clubs are the leadership event series of the Leadership Academy, which is brought to you by the Wheel, which is Ireland's Association for the Community, Voluntary Organisation, Charities and Social Enterprises. And the Academy is a place for leaders in our sector at any stage of their leadership journey to take the next steps on their leadership journey. And the breakfast clubs are designed to help you to take some time out and have a think about some of the bigger issues and connect with other people in the sector. So I am Sheena Hughes. I'm the Leadership Academy Manager, and this morning's event wouldn't happen without my colleagues. So Sinead and Matthew are here today, and my other colleague Pareen is away. So if you have any issues, can you please DM them directly? I won't actually see it if you do. And you can go onto our website at leadersacademy.ie, connect with us on LinkedIn, or I've just started an Instagram because I want to be cool, but not cool enough for TikTok. I almost said Twitter. So if you connect us on Insta, I would be so happy. So a big part of these events is the chance to network. So if you haven't done one before, about halfway through, we will pop you into a breakout room for a chat and a reflection. There will be no death by Zoom room, not on our watch. So the rooms will have a nominated facilitator who will be identifiable by an asterisk on their name. So you'll know that that person is there to kind of just keep the conversation moving in the room. If you cannot go into a breakout room, please let Matthew know through using the chat function. It just helps that if you could let us know so we don't assign the right amount of people, or we don't assign people who aren't engaging into rooms. And also Matthew might mute you if you accidentally have your mic on. Don't take it personally. So Matthew and Sinead are on support. And please note that the event is being recorded. So if you do take some pictures, we'd love for you to tag us on them as well on LinkedIn, or did I mention the Insta? So why we're here today. So as technology and remote work become like completely embedded in our lives, how are we leading virtually? So we suspect AI is going to take our jobs, but what happens to our leaders and our leadership styles? How will leadership change in the technological environment? So we don't know, but we found some people who do. So this month we're joined by Sheena Horgan. So Sheena's accomplished career includes advising private and not-for-profit entities on government's communications and crises, among other things. She was awarded the Women in Business Non-for-Profit CEO of the Year when she was at Drinkaware. Her advocacy for digital and media literacy, regulation and accountability led for her to be invited onto the Internet Commission's Advisory Board and Scrutiny Committee, and to create Ireland's first media literacy programme for primary schools called MediaWise. And she's also joined by Dr. Colin Hughes. Colin is the head of the Graduate Business School at the TU Dublin. He's an experienced education leader with a passion for providing engaging and impactful leadership education. And anyone who has taken our Grow Remote training will recognise Colin, where he's delivered a keynote on leadership and trust in virtual environments. So unlike some of our other topics, the issue of technology, it didn't just kind of bubble up, because in fairness, it's always there. And we were only chatting about it the other day. So when I first started in the Wheel in 2022, we were actually only back at work and hosting some of our first in-person events. So we had to do remote work, then hybrid work, trying to remember time pre-Zoom or Teams. Now the robots are coming and AI is going to steal our job. So I attended Grow Remote training, and Dr. Colin was the guest speaker, and he did the session on virtual leadership, and I really enjoyed it. And then I came across a blog that Sheena has written for the PSI on human-centered technology, and I thought, that's a very interesting vibe, so let's have a chat. So you've heard enough from me. So Sheena, if I can start with you, could you please give us a bit of your own background and your relationship as you see it with technology, please?
I suppose my background, my career is primarily or started in agency and consultancy. So I set up and ran an agency in London to start with. So that was back in the 90s. And if you think about it, communication and technology are kind of bedfellows of sorts. And there was always, back in the 90s, we had the dot-com boom, then bust. We had fax replaced by email. We had dial-up, if anybody remembers that, and that wonderful noise in your ear. We had mobile phones then came in, text messaging. And for my sins, I suppose I was advising and working with lots of organizations in that space, always with this wonderful promise of getting things connected. I remember distinctly 20 years ago hearing how everything was going to be connected and how long it took for everything to be connected, kind of like we are now. And I suppose because of that, I've always had an interest and curiosity in tech. But the difference is it's not that passion for tech. It's much more what it can do for me, what it can do for my clients, what it can do for the work that I'm in. And particularly, I suppose now in the last 10 years, being much more ensconced in the not-for-profit sector and working on boards and that, it's about how tech can help us in that space and how it can help the sector. So I think I use the expression, or my kids laugh the expression, I will never be the first to adopt technology, but I will certainly never be the last to adopt a new technology. I'll always try it. I think the curiosity piece is fundamentally important as an individual, but also, I suppose, as a leader or a board member or volunteer. Being curious about tech and what it can do for you, to me, is kind of my watchword.
Thank you so much. And Colin, what about you, your own background, and what role does technology play in your work and life?
Yeah, so good morning, everyone. So as Sharon said, I'm head of our graduate business school here at TU Dublin. So basically day to day, I spend a lot of time designing, developing, delivering leadership programs for all sorts of organizations, leading Irish and international. And a lot of that is within the tech sector. And even those that aren't in the tech sector are trying to figure out, what do we do? What does AI, what do advances in technology mean for me as a leader? And what do I have to upskill in? And trying to figure out that kind of, I suppose, landscape. Separately, I'm a non-executive director. I've served on a couple of boards, charity sector, and other not-for-profits. So I have a good sense of then how organizations, wider organizations, are kind of grappling with these challenges. My research area is in trust, leadership, virtual working. So again, of some kind of, I suppose, interesting insights around how you lead in a virtual environment as well. So like fundamentally technology is changing everything. So and the pace of change is rapid. So I think leaders are struggling to kind of keep up with that change.
Yeah, and when we spoke earlier, we have to talk about the big C. We have to talk about COVID and what that did and the rush and the kind of panic and everything. So could you maybe tell us a little bit about what you're seeing as like the long-term impact? Like now it's not a new thing anymore. It's starting to embed. So could you maybe elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, it's interesting. I suppose COVID drove us all remotely, as everyone knows, and we don't have to go into that too much. Where I think some people adapted to that quite well from a leadership perspective, and also from an individual contributor, like employee perspective. Others haven't, or others have gotten tired of it a little bit. I think we're starting to see that return to the office a bit. We're starting to see that in Dublin. You notice it in traffic. You notice it in very visible kind of news articles around what certain companies are doing, bringing people back. So I think we'll see more of that in the new year. I definitely think that that's going to happen. And I think like our MBAs are just back from Silicon Valley. They were in San Fran last year. They're just back this year. And there's a noticeable uplift there in the amount of people back in offices and so on. So the general trend is, I think we're starting to see a bit more of a return.
Yeah, and Sheena, what about you? What have you noticed since post-COVID?
Oh, it's in terms of teams and creating and building and engaging with teams, it's trickier, but it means you have to be, I suppose, as a leader, team leader, you have to focus and have to be more empathetic. It's a different kind of empathy, so to speak, because engaging with somebody online is trickier than face to face. You've less cues, I suppose, to pick up on. But what you do get to do is, I suppose, you can have even more engagement because you can have constant kind of check-ins and informal conversations. I think it's our way of communication has just changed fundamentally. What I'm picking up on just in terms of the organizations I'm dealing with and what I'm hearing is that move back to the office. And I think a lot of employers really want more, less hybrid, more back in the office. And employees are much more about, actually, I really like the hybrid because it gives a work-life balance. I think there's a real tension there, and that's going to take a while to level out. It's interesting, Colin mentioned the leadership and trust. Trust is probably the biggest thing that leaders need, but actually employers need to give their employees. And I think the big issue of trust is actually what has employers wanting people back in the office, although they might not admit it, but certainly from private sector as well as I think not for profit. So I think that our way of communication has just changed fundamentally, and it's still changing. It's a really dynamic space.
And you talk there about like there's actually opportunities in it, because I think there is this tendency, like it's turned into kind of like a little bit polarizing of like who wants remote versus who wants in the office. But I think we might be possibly overlooking some of the opportunities that come out of it. So like could you elaborate a little bit more there, Sheena, on some of the opportunities that you think that new technology is given like leaders in the space?
One of the things it has COVID and post COVID has forced us to do, if you like, is embrace tech. So if you weren't into Zoom calls beforehand, and if you're working for an international organization or you have people in different parts of the country, you may have been using it. COVID forced us all to use Zoom. It also forced Zoom to catch up and play updates as it's been doing kind of ever since. So I think it's forced us to try and embrace and be more open to tech and how we can use it. And if you think about it from the kind of documents that we use, the sharing that we have, the real-time conversations that we're having, all of that is a real opportunity. It's not forgetting the human element. And you mentioned the blog that I posted on AI is kind of like AI, but also any element of tech. We mustn't forget the humans involved. So we're the ones controlling, guiding, gearing, changing, using the tech, whatever that is, whatever format that is. So I think there's a real opportunity. Technology allows us to work remotely, virtually, and have better work-life balance, but it also creates, like every opportunity has a risk, every risk has an opportunity. It means you end up with, I've got more time now because I'm really efficient. Actually, I've got less time now because my work to-do list has just grown. And so it's real, we're in a really interesting, dynamic, evolving, I think, work era.
And Colin, what about you? Where do you see the opportunities?
Yeah, well, the first thing I'd say is like we're a good few years into this now, right? So as companies are making decisions around working practices and arrangements, they should have enough data now to provide to sell that story, right? And I think decisions have to be data driven. So if it's we're returning to the office because we're renting this huge city center building and we don't like the thoughts of it being empty, that's one type of decision. If it's we're returning to the office because we feel that, and this is a genuine thing in some cases, and I feel it myself, I feel that trying to be creative and get things done and collaborate can be a bit trickier when you're doing that in an online environment versus put us into a room with a couple of markers and a whiteboard and we'll, there's a certain flow to the conversation and so on. So people will have preferences around that. But I think it has to be data driven. We have the information now. So I think companies should know that. I think there's a few things on that as well. I think you absolutely have to work harder as a people manager in a hybrid environment, a remote environment. Someone said to me years ago, you have to be more intentional. And I think you do need to be more intentional. Sheena said, like building trust and showing people empathy and showing that you care and trying to engage and connect with them and caring about whether they're isolated or not, depending on whether they're connected with the rest of the team. Like these are important things. So I think hybrid leadership adds an extra layer because things don't come as naturally. Sometimes they're not as visible. So I think that's a piece there as well. My general piece around the tech and the leadership piece is, and I've heard people that are very tech savvy, and I'm not one of them, kind of really say to me that AI, is overused in terms of there's a lot of talk about AI. People need to take a step back and think like any technology that came before. What is the potential application of this technology? How do we use it to become more productive? And how do we use it to ultimately serve our customers or our community better? And I think sometimes that gets lost with the whole rush of AI, but take a step back. What does it mean for you as a business? And how are you going to actually leverage the technology in a way that works for you? And that's the piece I think that's important.
Yeah, so I read an article there a little while back about how back in, I don't know what year it was, but the maids in New York protested against the advent of the washing machine because they were like, this is going to do us all out of jobs, which is madness to think of now. But I think
Yeah.
what is really interesting there is you kind of called it there on the whole, like, leaders need to be more intentional online. And I think, Sheena, you've made reference to that as well. Like, is part of this in-person leadership, I'm being controversial just for the sake of the conversation, but is it a lazy way of doing leadership? As in, does doing things with true technology, like you said, have that additional layer to it?
You say that there's what AI and what tech can do is automate things and make us more productive, more efficient. So if you find a more efficient way to do things, that could arguably be taking a lazy approach or not. It depends on how you utilize it. The intentional bit is hugely important. So a bit like, from a governance point of view with regards to any tech, there should be digital policies. Organizations need digital policies. AI policies will be the new thing that is beginning to come in more. And we need to look at it from the governance point of view. What are we trying to do? What is the intention here? So we have to be intentional with how we use the tech. So therefore, we have to articulate it. And I think, I'm not sure if AI is overused or underused. I think it puts the fear of God into so many people going, I should be. It's a bit like saying I should be on TikTok. And I'm going, no, I shouldn't be on TikTok. TikTok is not for me. It's for somebody else, but it's not for me. It's a bit like AI. I think we should all be using AI, but we're all already using it without actually realizing we are probably in a million and one different, have been for years. We just didn't know that's what we called it. But the misnomer with AI is that we call it artificial intelligence, but it's accelerated, augmented, automated intelligence is what it is. It doesn't replace people. We are still the thinkers. AI doesn't think. It does based on what we tell it to do or the data inputs that we give. And it's a really important kind of difference. But yeah, that's me ranting slightly and coming off your lazy kind of.
No, I rant away. I'm just wondering, because like you've said about, like, being intentional requires effort. Like, and one thing is, effort is the opposite of automation. And it's interesting to me because a lot of organizations are bringing in, like, they would have IT policies about how the humans use the IT. There's very few policies that I've seen that says about how IT should be used to support humans. So that's my, just throwing it out there.
And I think, I think that's the really interesting thing about anything that takes people more effort and more work at a time when arguably people in the workplace have never been as busy. And I think that's the challenge. So I don't think it's a lazy thing, but I think, is there less to think about when you're leading, when everyone's on site? Yes, probably, because that's something that we're inherently born with and develop, that ability to see people and see how they're getting on and see people connecting and so on. So yeah, there's probably less to think about in that regard. I think what AI can do, given that, as I say, we've never been so busy, it can allow that automation, as Sheena says, it can allow us to become more productive. But that's only beneficial if we focus, right? So if you think of the work done on essentialism and the work done on kind of productivity and focus and so on, I think that work has never been more important. I think people are on a treadmill in organizations, battling this constant change, which in lots of organizations isn't managed well. It's change management through Excel files and PowerPoint files. It's not change leadership. It's not really engaging people. And if you want change to be successful and you want it to stick and you want people to stay with you on that course and be ready for the next wave of change, they have to feel part of it. But often what happens is you bring in consultants, they give you a million PowerPoint decks, they love decks, they do all the Excels, they do everything. And it feels like change is being done to you sometimes, rather than you being a part of it. And I think that's a challenge, because change is just here to stay, and it's not going to slow down anytime soon. So organizations need to get better at change and be change ready, is what I'd say, and that happens with trust, a lot of it.
I agree. I think what the tech can do is it can enable transformative change. So it's not just change for the sake of changing. It's not just adopting for the sake of adopting. It's actually transforming, as you and I both said, Colin, and completely agree. And it's how can it help us do better, quicker, faster, better quality, all of those kind of things. And I think working with people, people don't mind change and the idea of change, but they don't like being changed. So it's that forcing the change on people. So you absolutely have to bring people on that journey, and the kind of death by PowerPoint, I completely agree with. So it's not just, it can't be theoretical. It has to be hands-on. I think as leaders, we need to roll up our sleeves and get our hands dirty and ask questions and be honest and go, I know this and I don't know this. What do you know? And ask the questions of everybody about their experiences with different tech and how they engage and what they want. And by bringing people on a journey, you can evoke change and get far more, success where you're trying to go by having those inclusive conversations. The inclusivity piece is really important, and taking the fear out of it that your job may change, but it may change for the better because we can do this bit. Automate this bit will allow you to have more time to do the thinking, creativity, or whatever else.
I think, Sheena, you've kind of your example of the change was moving into technology, and I think one of the reasons both of you struck me as such a great combo was neither of you are like technological experts, and I think again it's that polarization of either you're really expert at technology or you know nothing and you class yourself as a Luddite or whatever. But actually, part of having this conversation is saying to people, okay, you're going to have to meet in the middle. I love, Sheena, what you said. I won't be the first, but I won't be the last. And I would assume there's probably people on the call who are like, it's living rent free in their head that they need to get into this technology. They need to embrace technology and make it work for them. So you guys are a couple of steps ahead without being like, right, AI needs to run your house. So what role should leaders be playing? Like as leaders, what should they be doing with technology now? AI, remote, whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, like that. I mean, I'm never going to be the person that knows most about the tech, right? Because that's not my background. I'm not a computer science guy. I'm not, like I will never understand that in the same way as other people will. So I think you need to know who understands it, and you need to be able to engage with them. And Sheena mentioned, I think, curiosity. You need to be curious, and you need to think about, you need to understand the practical application of the technology and what it can do for your organization, what it can do for your customers' pain points or your community's pain points. You need that piece. You need to know where to go to get the information and partner with the right people. But not everyone needs to be the expert on the technology, because you just need good people on your team, within your organization, that you have access to, that are absolutely top of the game in that area. It's up for leaders to have the vision then around what we do with this. And ultimately, I think that's a big challenge with leadership. I see a lot of people that would refer to themselves as leaders, that probably are strong on operations, not as strong on vision. And I think, great leaders have vision. They narrow that down to objectives, and they focus, and they drive a whole lot of focus to achieving that vision. And they cut out and say no to a load of the other stuff that they see as non-essential. That's what great leaders do. They don't try and do everything. But that's a work in progress for all of us, right? Because we get dragged in every direction by all sorts of things, and I suppose you're trying to be helpful, to people as well.
Yeah, and not to put words in your mouth, but when we just talked earlier, what you actually mentioned was an entrepreneurial vision, like that essence of it. Yeah.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of work on entrepreneurial leadership. We have a specialist unit here, and we're working with a couple of tech companies around this. And so how do you actually create leaders across an organization at every level of an organization that are entrepreneurial in their thinking? And that doesn't mean they're going to go out and set up an entrepreneurial venture. It means that they're people that have a bit of vision, that they can sense the market. They have all the data they need to make decisions. They have a sense of, within their network, understanding what's happening in their sector, in their communities, and so on, and that they're able to shape all that into a vision that they're able to then articulate. Because without the vision, you're just going around in circles all the time, and the pace of change is so much. And these groundbreaking technologies like AI, you have to know where your organization is going to be operating, and you have to be able to get people aligned under that vision.
Yeah. And Sheena, yourself, any thoughts?
I think there's kind of three things leaders need with regards to this changing kind of tech culture, and the first is ownership, which kind of plays along with what Colin was saying, that it's the use of the technology, that ownership, and those decisions should be sitting with the leaders, be that, you know, CEO, executive, or boards. It doesn't mean they have to be the doers, but they have to be the ones who own it and who farm it out and have the conversations and find partners and collaborators. So ownership is there. It should not be given to an IT individual. For me, the tech has to sit with as high up the food chain as it possibly can. And it's why we'll find ourselves with an awful lot of problems. We're already in them, say in social media, because it's the tech individuals who are looking after it, as opposed to where's the human approach, which was the point of the blog that I did that started this piece, our conversation, Sharon. So I think ownership is key. Second thing is responsible tech. And we need to look at what the tech is doing. And that's about the intent and the goal and what the purpose of it from a responsible perspective. And that responsible piece, looking at kind of equality and everything else, is fundamentally important for our sector, more so than even the private sector. Because we are the ones who should be, you know, who have, I suppose, if I say the moral high ground, I mean it like that, but not quite as trite as that sounds. So I think that's important. And the third thing I think leaders really need to look at is the governance of any tech that we use. And that again ties into the responsible piece. So how do we manage this? What are the policies? What are the legalities? All of that. Again, it's ownership. It's not necessarily the knowledge, doesn't have the knowledge, and doing doesn't have to sit here, but I have to own and understand it to find it out. And but that would be good leadership across, I suppose, so many different organizational elements. Tech is just another piece of it.
Yeah, Colin, I think you said something similar, like it's always leadership, you're just doing it in a different place.
Oh, it's leadership. This is, you know, tech changes. I mean, you know, what happened when we got PCs? What happened when we previously got calculators? What happened when we got washing machines and stuff? Like you're always dealing with technological advancements. And you know, like a couple of years ago, there was a huge amount of talk around blockchain and other technologies. We've a lot of kind of, you know, AR, VR, those type of technologies, and some of them, a lot more happens with some of them in a quick time frame. Some of them maybe don't end up being as impactful and so on. But ultimately, we need to know what the use cases are. We need to know how it benefits us personally in terms of making our lives easy, helping us deal with that workload. You know, we need to know what we need to know, what our teams need to know, and as I say, how we can leverage that in a commercial way. And I mean that even in a not non-profit, like, you know, not to make money, but in a user-centric way, how do we benefit people with this technology? You know, people rush to apply technology sometimes and haven't thought it through really enough, and then end up spending money and they haven't thought about the problem. You should start really with the problem, I believe, anyway.
Yeah, as opposed to the nice sales pitch that came in for the fancy technology. And like, if you were to just, in your own opinion, what are ways that you think that leaders can be harnessing technology? Like, there probably are very simple ways. That's one of the things I would like to, I think we mentioned using our calendars properly. But you know, some of that right up to the technology and the tech.
Yeah, like Sheena will have plenty of ideas on this, I'm sure. I mean, like from my perspective, the AI is happening to us and has been happening to us for a long time, right? So without us making any efforts, products that we engage with and consume with are increasingly using AI, right? And even in the workplace, then from a leadership team perspective, if you're buying new CRM systems, if you're buying different IT systems, different things, like pretty much all providers now are starting to kind of enhance the use of AI within them as well. So that's going to happen naturally to us as we buy things and so on. But I think then we need to think about our own particular service. Is there something like in terms of our own product or service, how then does AI enable that to be better? And that's the piece that probably needs a bit more thought around before you kind of jump in and say, we're going to use AI. Okay, well, how will we do it? And if we've a limited budget and spend, how are we going to use it in the most effective manner, you know?
Yeah.
I think it's worth asking each of your team groups to think about how they use AI, can they use AI, and to kind of experiment within kind of certain parameters. And to give you some kind of examples of that, I've always worked with, say, policy comms teams. And as everyone, I'm sure, on the call and in the sector knows, we are awash with reports and submissions and consultations and papers and whatnot, hundreds and hundreds of papers. And there's an element of, say, with the comms team, I would have said, okay, let's take those 3 big reports and let's see if we can analyze them. And how do we do that? And how can AI help us to do that better? And the caveat there is, I am not saying you ever take something that's produced and go, right, that's tick that box, it's done. You have to interrogate it and double check it. No less than if I delegated a task to somebody, I would check it just to be sure, are we okay? Is this on page? But it's things like that. I think what AI can do from that perspective is that analysis and joining up dots. Can come up with kind of solutions. And by playing around with it like that, you put in something, you put in a question, but you keep interrogating more. Yeah, can you give me the reference points for that? Yes, can you look at it for this time zone? Yes, can you look at it from? And you keep putting in extra parameters and see what comes out. So that's just kind of one quite practical kind of use. But also what's happening now with AI is it's going to, if not replace, become a type of Google and YouTube. So we started off with Googling things, going, how do I do such and such? And then YouTube almost took over from that search engine piece. And now AI is doing that. And as the data that it can access gets closer and closer to real time, so say within the last year or two, whatever. Interestingly, for that, when I read this piece that said it was becoming that search engine, I went, okay, let's see. And I fed in a question, which was, oh, I don't know, give me Sheena Horgan's points on artificial intelligence according to her blogs and articles, whatever. I went, okay, let's see what comes up. And stuff popped up, not that I've written a huge amount on it, but anything that did was only, I'd say, was probably 3 years old, 2, 3 years old. It wasn't any closer than that. So I was curious. So that's a very loose example, but just to show you that timepiece is important. So it's about using it. But every service sector, whether you're in accounting or IT or policy or services or operations, you need to think, how can I use it in small and big ways? And I think using it in small ways takes away some of the fear and then allows you to embrace it and move on to bigger things. It's certainly, one way of taking it.
Yeah, and I know in our previous conversation, we actually talked more about how you could use it as a leader, as in like buying yourself time. Was it, I think, Colin, you mentioned about that if you used AI to automate the bits that you can automate, then you can focus on the intentional piece and the trust piece.
Yeah, and I suppose a lot of what we're seeing at the moment is as people get to grips with AI, and like let's say if most of us aren't very advanced in our knowledge of AI, people are using that as an advanced form of search, as Sheena would say. It's been used within organizations a lot for analyzing data, large data sets. I mean, we're seeing the power of it to do that. And people are using it a lot to craft communications and content, right? Which some of that needs to be fact checked, and a lot of them will have provisos to say this was AI generated, so you need to fact check it, because sometimes it will, and I've seen it myself firsthand, and it's well publicized. It will produce things that aren't necessarily factual. It will fill in gaps, right? It will make things up essentially, right? And so we are at that stage of still having fact checked. But like that, it can create time. Like we were doing a leadership panel discussion, not unlike this one a while ago, and we were talking about questions and things that we'd ask. And a colleague of mine says, I'll throw it into ChatGPT. And it came up with a whole host of questions that you might ask, a leadership panel, which, so things like that where you're saying, oh, they're interesting. And then you're getting into, right, what will we use? Like, what ones do we like? What ones do we not like? What would work, right? Similarly, we were looking to come up with a new section of a website where we're going to have certain insights and stuff that we're going to share. And we were like grappling with, what do we call this thing? And like that, pop it into AI and come up with a whole bunch of kind of potential titles and say, yeah, I like that one. So it can save time from that perspective and free people up. But I suppose we need to be, what would I say, kind of committed to actually then using that time, if we're freeing any up, for deeper thinking, for engaging with people, for the types of things, rather than just putting that time back into the email trail and the stuff that often doesn't add huge value in terms of going back to trying to achieve those objectives. What's really important for us. I think that focus piece, as I say, is more important than ever. So if AI allows us focus a bit more, great.
Yeah, Sheena,
To that point,
you made reference to this about the I think, wasn't it an hour, like about that today leaders aren't making the time.
to just sit and be and think. And it's, I think Colin's point is really well made, is that we find ways to be more efficient, to do more stuff, as opposed to actually find ways. And as leaders, it's really important to take the thinking time to just sit and be. And it's almost feels completely counterintuitive that we could possibly sit in an office in the chair with our feet up, just twiddling our thumbs thinking. That would seem really weird in this day and age, but actually it's even more important. And we need to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. And there's some very successful leaders have come out publicly, like, Bill Gates used to do this quite a bit. He'd take significant periods of time off just to read, right? And to think around the business, to clear his head, to figure out what he's going to do next. I remember just a quick anecdote. I remember running a program years ago, a sales program. I was running around the country, and I remember a company owner coming, and it was 2 days a month, had to take out of the business, if you like, to attend this program. And at the end of it, he said, you know what, program was great, really enjoyed the content, it's really good, learned a lot. But the biggest benefit was me being out of the business for 2 days a month. It forced me to allow others the autonomy to step up, to say, okay, let the team. And he said, you know what, they're doing a great job. They're doing as good a job as I'd ever do, if not better. But what it has given me is 2 days of thinking time. And he said, the challenge for me now is to keep that time in the diary, take those 2 days a month, and actually just spend it working, as people say, that kind of maybe a corny phrase, working on the business rather than in the business. So actually thinking about what's next and where are we going to, because we're all the time rushing around in this mad panic with a million different messaging platforms and different things, and email and Teams messages and Slack and all sorts of different things. And we're kind of just on this wheel, really. And you need to have the discipline to step off that.
Absolutely. Isn't that the phrase whenever somebody says, how are you? Oh, busy. It used to be, I'm busy. You kind of go, what do you have to say busy? I'm not busy. Actually, I'm great.
Yeah.
It's
not a badge
that's
of honor.
The kind of culture we have. Yeah.
I always love these. But first of all, this is one of the reasons we have these spaces, because I remember somebody coming to me at the start, what's the point? And I was like, they proudly have no point. Like, that is the point, is they have no point. We are just going to have conversations and see where they go. And what's interesting is that you both came in here to talk about technology, but you've both ended up with like human approaches to, it's not the technology, it's what you're going to do with the technology that increases your personage, that you're going to be able to give back as a leader.
People at the end of the day. So, you need to invest time and effort into yourself as a person or your leaders. So if you have a senior management team, you invest in their leadership. So it's you have to evolve as a person. And we mentioned trust at the beginning, and we mentioned empathy. You're not going to have either of those things, either to be able to give them out or receive them, unless you're investing that time in yourself as well. So we need to kind of be, oh God, I was going to say be gentle, be kind to ourselves. That sounds a bit, that's too trite for me at this hour of the morning. But it is that kind of thing. We do need that thinking time and space for sure.
But it's funny, they're the things, those human elements are the unique things that AI can't replace.
Can't take.
It can't show empathy. Now it can be programmed to say things that sound empathetic, maybe, but like it's not like it's not human, right? And those aspects of kind of unique to humans around those human skills of creativity and engagement and empathy and trust building and all those things are things that we probably just need to continue to get better at.
And use the technology to give us the space to be human. One of the things we do pride ourselves on is trying to give practical tips and advice to people as they're leaving. So from your own tiptoeing around the edges of being not digital experts, what would be one thing you would say to somebody today, right? That if you were at like 0.0, what would be something that you could commit to that should get you started on hopefully a healthy relationship with technological advancement?
Oh, sorry,
Sorry,
Colin,
go
go on.
ahead, Sheena. Go ahead.
I think I'm in a slight time lag, and
Yeah,
it's
tiny
obviously
little one, but
my AI avatar is responding for me, so it's on a slightly time lag. I think it is roll your sleeves up and try it, and try and take the fear away. So you as an individual and you as a team, it's having the open, honest conversations with the team, as I said, and going, right, guys, who uses what? And what can we use? And let's workshop it, let's brainstorm, let's go away, think about it, come back. Let's look at, if our organization was to have an AI policy, what would it be? What would it look like? And for me, if you start with something like a policy, in a lighter touch way, or even a press release, and it's kind of the comms person in me, it's not that you're going to announce anything to the world, but it's, if you write a press release, you start with the header, the headline, and then the first paragraph, and then the detail. So think about it from the organizational point of view. So organization X is utilizing AI for what? What are we trying to do? And really just experiment, take the fear away, and give it a go. And if you use it in personal as well as work life, and I'll give you an example of that was probably one of my first experiences. I was doing a drive through France, and I knew I had to get from A to B, and I had 2 nights to stop over, and I had no idea the route. So I literally plugged in, I'm coming into Cherbourg and I want to get to AXA. How will I get there? Staying in nice places, driving no more than 4 hours, not on main roads, but in all the criteria I had. And lo and behold, seconds later, 2 or 3 roadmaps came in. I checked it. One of them was completely bogus, but the other one was great. But I tried it. And that was, I kind of, from a personal point of view, tried it, and then tried to apply that from work. So it is, I think, roll up your sleeves, give
you
it a
did
go.
also mention something that I just remembered was actually around building psychological safety in your team and that they felt comfortable.
Yeah. And that's the honesty piece. That's saying, I know, I'm not an expert here. You probably, as a team, you probably use it more than I do and use tech more than I do. So let's share. Let's kind of go on that journey together. And it's also taking the fear out for yourself, but taking the fear out for the team. Am I going to be replaced? And it's like, no, actually, I'm going to reward you. If you can come up with a way of using this piece of technology or tool to be more efficient, that's going to free up your time to do something else. Let's talk about that. And to Colin's point about, if it frees up your time, what are you going to replace it with? So that's the conversation you need to be having. But the best leaders are the ones who speak to people on that human level anyway.
Yeah.
This is about applying it to this
Yeah.
particular topic. But yeah, and making sure people feel safe in that space, because there is an awful lot of fear out there. And if you have a diverse team, especially if there's an age diversity in there, that can be even more scary.
Yeah.
So it's important to have those open and honest conversations.
Yeah. And Colin?
Yeah, and I think there's that fear that if we free up all this time, my manager in work is going to pack it with other stuff, right? So I think leaders have a bit of an obligation around ultimately what's the impact the team is having, right? Or the function or the unit in the organization, and how do we leverage AI to do that? And how are we taking a common sense approach and a people-centric approach about it as well? The one thing I'd add to that is the need to, and this isn't just an AI thing, but it's in work situations in general, the need to break through the complex, right? So, great communicators are able to bring things down to their simplest form, right? To really understand it. Business isn't overly complex, right? And people can be varying degrees of complex, but like poor communications and uninformed kind of views and politics and things like that bring complexity into organizations. So it's important to ask the right questions, to make sure that you're getting factual information, to keep probing, to be curious, to be a critical thinker. That's one thing we haven't mentioned, but it's something we always try and teach. But in a world of an avalanche of information, the ability to think critically about information, including the information that AI gives to us, right? To have that critical lens on things actually empowers you then to make better decisions with things. But there's a danger now that we're all, and it's back to my first point, AI, the 2 letters that are overused, right? Because everyone's talking about AI, but it's just talk, a lot of it, right? So, well, what does it actually mean? Do I understand it, even if it's in its simplest form? and how might we leverage it, but break through that complexity. It's no good someone talking to us about AI, and we do this all the time, and coming in bamboozling us with the kind of the technical aspect of it, right? Because for 99% of people they're talking to, they'll lose them straight away, right? Just like really understand what it is and what we can use it for. We all use computers, we all use the internet, we don't necessarily know, the layperson doesn't know how they actually work, right? And we don't need to know how they work in many ways. We need to know what they can do, and we need to know who to ask when we have questions.
Okay, I
As
love
you
it. Yeah, I
said
don't know how
earlier,
Excel works.
sorry, as you said earlier, Colin, know what the problem is you're trying to solve.
Yeah,
What are you trying to solve?
yeah,
And if you
yeah.
start with that, work backwards from that.
Because
Yeah.
we can get lost with the technology. The good example is we talk sometimes to colleagues in tech companies, and they'll say, I can put programmers and stuff, and I can put people in a room, and they'll come up with all sorts of features for products. But the job of the leader is to say, that's great, that's really interesting, but is anyone going to buy it? Or does anyone actually want it? Right. And that's the challenge, right?
Yeah.
So
It,
like,
I was
you
just
know,
trying. So we're coming up on time. So I absolutely love it. I was chatting to a leader of a social enterprise the other day who was 3 or 4 years old, and she said it had completely. They were kind of like, what are we doing? And they sat down and were like bringing it back to basics, and they realized that their core vision now was what they started with 3 years ago, but they got completely sidelined with chasing grants, chasing fundraising, people saying, you know, it'd be a great idea. And she said, when we actually sat down, we should have been doing what we started. Like that sometimes it is simpler than it should come across. I can't believe time is up. I can, but I can't. What is your best piece of leadership advice? Who's going to go first? I did warn you.
Put it
yeah.
on the agenda.
Sheena, sorry, you broke up at the start.
Sorry, put it on the agenda.
Put it on the agenda.
If it's not on the agenda, you won't be. It'll be these conversations and cooler conversations and coffee conversations and whatnots. Put it on the agenda, be it the board agenda or your team agenda, but put it on the agenda. Even if you're going, I don't know what we're going to say, but it's there. So you have to keep having the conversation.
Love it. And Colin?
Like I mentioned, be a person of vision. Have a vision, right? Whatever that might be, whatever role you are. But if you're trying to, if your leadership's about influence, if you're trying to influence people towards a vision, whatever that might look like, and vision for some people might sound a little bit, your man talking about vision here, but it's just like, where are we going and what do we want to achieve? That's the vision, right? And what's the end state? And don't try and don't get sidetracked if everyone doesn't come with you, because you're always going to have people that are negative and naysayers. You can't please everyone. You can only do your best to communicate a compelling vision and then try and build the relationships and look after people and so on. But you're not going to get 100% of people all the time. But if you get sidetracked by the small amount of resistance, well, then you're never going to achieve anything.
Yeah, and you'll wake up wondering how you got there. I love it. Thank you both so much. So what we do now is we're going to pop you into breakout rooms. So Matthew and Sinead will assign you into breakout rooms now, and there will be a person in your room that has an asterisk on their name who will be there to make sure that the conversation doesn't die. No death by Zoom room. And then we'll call you back in at about 20 past, 25 past 11, because there are some questions. And if you have more questions for the panel, we'll bring it to them then. And then we'll be out of here by 11:30. I hope that's okay. So thank you so much, Colin and Sheena. That was so interesting. I really appreciated it.
Thanks, folks.
Sure.
Yeah. I'm not going to start talking. I'm going to let Matthew put us into rooms. How are everybody? That's not English. How are you all? How did it go? There's Colin. Did you survive?
We did. They
We had
went
a great
easy on me.
conversation. How was yours?
Yeah, very interesting. Good, great insights and just people's thoughts, and we finished up with some talks about engagement in a virtual environment, which is, I love to hear the different approaches teams are taking, so.
Yeah, Sheena, what about your anything interesting in your group?
It was good. I think we kind of built on or carried on from the time to think and the importance of putting it on the agenda and allowing for that time and also policy. I think it was the Mary Jo from the Irish Wheelchair Association. Sorry, Mary, I'm speaking for you there, but referred to having a policy which is in progress. And I think that policy and governance piece is hugely important because, you know, I'm saying roll up your sleeves and get your hands dirty, which is great. But actually, if people are throwing a whole load of data into ChatGPT, I'm actually suggesting a huge kind of problem area. But that policy piece and that governance piece is key as well. We're kind of two main areas. And some thoughts to go back to the wheel with that Johnny, I think, is going to take back with you.
Yeah, I think we got our job. We had an organization, South Dublin Volunteer Centre, Trisha. I'm naming it here because she got a job. They are using AI for everything. They're using it in Google Drive to map out their photos, their volunteer photos, so that they're banked properly and stuff. So we actually had a chat about maybe building our own kind of knowledge sharing community that we would try and internally do some of that kind of psychological safe testing things out. So Trisha's nominated herself to go first. Thank you, Trisha. I nominated. She's just got voluntold. Curious to know, anyone familiar with software program for captioning that transcribes live conversation and understands the Irish voice? This actually got asked in my class the other day, and because apparently our accent breaks most transcribing systems. Does anyone have?
Yeah, some of the
I
built-in
know a
ones
few,
do.
but I've never come across the Irish accent
Being a
issue.
Issue.
problem. Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
extreme. Some of the thicker accents are quite hard. But yeah, ChatGPT I have heard as well. And also the Zoom transcript isn't actually that bad, the built-in, or
Teams have similar
Microsoft
ones,
Word.
and like Otter and a couple of others have.
Mm.
Yeah.
And there was a thing developed by a couple of researchers in DCU at one stage that I'll find the link, Sharon, and send it on to you. But I know I used it. I uploaded a bunch of transcripts and it spit me out voice recordings, and it spit me out transcripts, and it was pretty good. So yeah.
Here they're already helping each other out here in the chat. They've
In
got
there.
Gemini, fellow Dapat, Gemini. That's fantastic. Do you know what we'll do? If you could throw anyone that you're using into this, we'll include it in the email that we're sending out to everybody, because people are like kind of a little bit wondering where to start. Marion asked there, should she already be using it? And I mentioned in our group there, I am not using AI for work yet. And I use the example of I had a mobile phone for a long time before I had a work mobile phone, and being able to distinguish between them was very useful. So with AI at the moment, I use it for myself. If I have a question, I think to myself, I'm going to chuck that into AI and see what the answer is, especially when I'm comfortable that I know what the answer is. And so I'll sense check a presentation or a route or something like that. So that I'm comfortable when it comes down the line from work. So I don't know, Colin, Sheena, I think
Well,
I'm also committed, to reading articles and learning. I threw the Cyber Safe Kids report in there because I think that's a lovely, really interesting way of explaining it's not the tech that's the problem, it's how you use the tech that's the problem. Sorry, Colin.
yeah, and like we are using it because it's built into Zoom and Teams, and it's built into, so I like, to my earlier point, like we're using it without realizing we're using it, and that will be more and more the case as we go forward. I think it's up to individuals as well then, and this is a broader than this discussion within organizations. Like if you're a HR specialist, spend a bit of time thinking how AI is transforming HR. For example, what it will do very well is it'll help you write job specs. It will help you kind of do an analysis on CVs. It will do all of these things, but you have to then obviously sense check that and get used to it. And it's one step at a time, as Sheena says, ease yourself into it. One of the things came in our talk around, they liked that it was kind of positive in terms of we weren't scaremongering around AI and so on. And the point I made is like, we need to give ourselves a break on that, because like some of the largest tech companies in the world who have thousands of people that are specialists in some of these areas have known about AI for decades now, and they lost the march, and some of the competitors, they were way behind, right? So I mean, we, like us sitting here as non-specialists, most of us give ourselves a break. And the other thing on that I'd say is we need to give ourselves a break as well on that focus time. Try and plan that time out where we get to think But everyone goes through busy times, or if you're in the middle of a merge, or if you're in the middle of a large transformational project, there might be a period of time where you're not taking enough of that time. But that's fine. Just once you know that you're going to get back to that, I think. So give ourselves a break, be kind to ourselves, I think, is a key thing in a modern workplace.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Sheena, anything?
I use it all the time for things like, as you say, here's a report, shorten it, give me the key bullet points from a particular perspective. Give me the references. I'll always ask for references because then you get to check and see. And sometimes stuff will get thrown up and there'll be like 3 references when there should be about 20. And I'll go, oh, okay, so I need to double check this. So I'll use it as a shortcut for that, or checklist. Here's this, give me a checklist, give me the top 10 things I need to do from it. So it kind of, I'm obviously, comms is one of my big areas. So I invariably come back to content and comms and text and comparing things, and it really helps for that. A word of warning on the HR side, that I'm very conscious of is when, a bit like you can even use, say, LinkedIn, and say, here's a job spec and here are the 4 things it needs to have, and LinkedIn will filter those job specs according to those 4 things. There is always a danger then of missing out and losing on the fantastic person who hasn't followed that kind of remit. And I have a fantastic niece doing amazing work in the equivalent of a rape crisis centre in the UK, who's now burnt out and looking for work. And she says, well, what, I'm going to use LinkedIn. And I said, well, be very careful, because if you don't follow the language patterns, the AI bot will screen you out and they will be missing on like a phenomenal individual. So just from that HR piece, be careful on that one.
HR and recruitment companies have been doing that for years. I remember being
Yeah.
told to put buzzwords in white at the bottom of to make sure that it actually got scanned for it. So it's another example of how actually we're already functioning in this environment.
Algorithms took all that up, and even Google were blacklisting companies at one stage, I think, because they were writing text in the same color as the page in the background, so that when you did web searches looking for things, that organically would pick that up, because you've mentioned AI a million times on a web page, right? So it would, but nobody can see that because it's in white text or whatever, So yeah.
And another thing is, you can always learn around something, is always something that I would say. You don't have to learn AI, but you should read. There are articles about AI and about its impact that it's already having on. We were talking in our room, we were at Learnovate, and one of the doctors flagged that she felt AI like addiction, that people misreading their relationship with AI, like that they think the AI is sentient essentially, and that it's a friend and a partner. And she was like, this is going to be a big issue for people who are already vulnerable and feeling isolated, because we know loneliness is a global crisis, and really important in Ireland, but people are going to misinterpret these relationships. So there are so many ways, again, for you to read about it and understand how it might impact without necessarily being an expert in AI.
Yeah.
And also, I mentioned I was at an event last night, a Women in AI event last night, and one of the speakers was referring to, there's a whole load of stuff being done at an EU level. So all around the Digital Services Act, and there is an AI policy, there's a government AI advisory group. There's a lot being talked and done about this, and there's a lot of questions being asked and inputs being looked for. So there is no reason why the sector or any of the individuals, organizations in the sector, can't engage in that space, that EU space, make submissions, ask questions from your perspective. It doesn't have to be a tech language submission that you make. It can be a concerned independent director here for a not-for-profit sector asking, where's the human in all this? You can be as simple or as elaborate as you like. There's a huge wealth of information out there, at all sorts of different levels from all different perspectives, and it's worth reading up on for sure.
And AI can help with that as well. So like Google LM Notebook does this, but others do it as well, where they'll take a large, dense document and they'll turn it into a podcast discussion that you can listen to on the bus, or you can, as you're commuting and so on. So that's
American accents.
With the American accent and so on. And as I say, and someone, Helen makes a chat that AI hallucination and hallucinating is a real thing. And it absolutely is, because it will make certain things up and feed them in. But it is a useful tool, albeit fact check it and references and stuff if you're doing more on it. But just even getting your knowledge of AI up and use cases and things like that, it can be useful for that.
what we are going to apparently is when this legislation comes through, so within the next year or so, there's going to be watermarks. So if something is AI generated, it's going to be watermarked. So you're going to know this article was this a bit like we know chatbots, you can see it's a chatbot. So you know it's a bot you're talking to and not a person when you're looking at help desks and stuff. But there will be that watermark piece.
Oh my goodness, we're at time. Doesn't it fly? I told you it would fly. Thank you everybody so much for joining us. I've definitely learned so much. Most of it that yet again, leadership all just comes back down to the people and it's the tools and how you use them. I have committed to working internally to get together some sort of lunch and learn where we can skill share with some people who are already using AI in the sector. If you guys have any ideas for that, it would be brilliant. We will collate all of the things that you've told us here in the chat and we'll include it in the email that we send out. Thanks so much for and we'll include blogs and books by Dr. Colin and Sheena. Listen, thank you both, Sheena, Colin, thank you so much for your conversation. It's been so accessible, I think is the really important thing for everybody. So we really, really appreciate your time, and we'll send out your LinkedIn so people can connect with you if they want to as well. Okay.
Folks, really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.